Today we're going to discuss the Haggard West proposed rezoning case, which is zoning case 2020-32. Before we get started, there are a few terms that we need to discuss. The first of those terms is what a rezoning is, which is that's a request to change what is currently allowed to be built on a parcel of land. So Haggard West has some existing zoning on it. We're going to discuss this request is a request to change that zoning, which must be approved by the Plano Planning and Zoning Commission and by the Plano City Council in order to be effective. The second term we're going to discuss is a concept plan. So in this presentation, you will see the concept plan that has been presented by the developer, which is supposed to reflect what he plans to do with the land and the reasons for the rezoning request. You will also see another term though, and that is the stipulations for zoning. And it's actually the stipulations for zoning that set the parameters of what can be done on the land. This is what will actually change the zoning. So the concept plan is just intended to help understand what the stipulations are about, but it does not set the zoning. The stipulations do. And this is very important in this case because the stipulations being requested by the developer are inconsistent with the concept plan, and that's one of the major concerns and flaws with this zoning case. So the zoning case involves what are referred to as 3 tracts. That's where they've taken the land and they've divided it into tracts 1, 2, and 3. We'll discuss that more in a minute. But to understand the significance of the zoning case, it's important to understand what the end result is. And I want to give you an overview of that because this zoning case involves several pieces and important considerations related to adjacent land. But fundamentally, there are 350 apartments being discussed in an area that's referred to as Tract 1, and another 350 four-story apartment building in Tract 2. In Tract 3, there are 4 5-story assisted living buildings with total living units of 427. And then there's a related tract that's part of what we're going to discuss. That's an age-restricted apartment building with 224 units. There also is an adjacent parcel also owned by the Haggard family, and it has 183 units, and another adjacent tract just on the other side of Parkwood Boulevard with 660 apartments. So you can see in total we're talking over 2,000 living units, and we'll talk about this in more detail, but I wanted to give you that as an overview and also point out that the Haggard family also has this whole area that's west of what we are discussing. It is just as large, and it's very, very much up in the air what will ultimately be with the development of that property. The other point I want to make, even though we were talking about what were 2,000 living units in this area, is the fact that that is what is portrayed in the concept plan we're going to be looking at. But again, the concept plan is very different from the stipulations, and the stipulations would basically allow what's in the concept plan to be doubled in terms of density of the buildings and square footage. So with that, we're going to move to this. And in this, as I said, the zoning request is divided up as portrayed in the zoning case to 3 areas. Area 1 being immediately north of Avignon and running along Parkwood Boulevard between the high-intensity power lines and Spring Creek Parkway. Area 2 being this area. It's a small area. It is also north of the high voltage power lines and runs along Spring Creek on the eastern side of the property. And then area 3 is south of the high voltage lines, also running along Spring Creek and immediately south of area 2. There also is an area 4, which is relevant. The developers tried to exclude this from the case, but it actually is very relevant to the case. And it is part of the existing zoning for this land in what we're going to talk about, which is PD 243. And so what happens in area 4 certainly would affect what could happen in areas 1, 2, and 3 with the current zoning. So here is the concept plan as portrayed by the developer. And again, I caution you that the concept plan is not the stipulations. And what you're going to see in here doesn't reflect what's actually being requested in terms of the stipulations. But starting with area 1 right here, we first have a 4-story apartment building with 350 units and a 5-story parking garage. Next to that is portrayed 3 4-story office buildings right here with 2 3-story parking garages to serve them. So 1, 2, 3. And then we have 3 2-story office buildings along Parkwood, and then a hotel that's portrayed as a 2-story boutique hotel. So that is all development in here. There's also a small retail area about where the number 1 is that's about 10,000 square feet, so quite small. Then area 2 is right here, and here is another 350 unit 4-story apartment complex with a 4-story structured parking garage, and then 2 small 2-story offices next to it in the land. I should also mention there's a small park right here. This is 3 acres. The park was something that the Haggard Development Company agreed to serve the Avignon neighborhood, and they've had an obligation to construct this park for some time, and they would finally do it with the development of area 2. And then area 3 is down here, is south of the high power lines, and in area 3 are 4 assisted living buildings, each 5 stories. There's 2 3-story office buildings that would serve the assisted living and also the age-restricted apartments. This could include administrative offices as well as doctors, nurses, physical rehabilitation, and other facilities to serve the assisted living center. Then I'm going to again mention area 4, which is right here, and this includes a 5-story 224 unit age-restricted apartment building for age 55 and above. Down here, the developer has proposed 30 two-bedroom cottages that would be constructed here. And then in the very southeast corner here are what I'm showing as 183 apartments. The developer has sent out and presented to neighborhood groups, sometimes showing this as being 100 townhomes. But this request does not change the existing zoning here, which would allow 183 apartments. It's actually zoned for multifamily. While they could build townhomes here, they're not required to, and they're not requesting to change the zoning to require them to build single family. So I would still count those as 183 multifamily units that would go here. Finally, up in the very north, on the southwest corner of Parkwood and Spring Creek, there's existing zoning that was set by another PD. This land is also owned by the Haggard family, and it allows multifamily. It allows it in a very dense fashion. It allows this zoning at what's referred to as a Florida area ratio of 4:1. That would basically allow up to 12 stories. And it is zoned to allow multifamily. So this would easily accommodate 660 apartments. Technically, it would 1,300 apartments would be within the zoning for this area. I've put it at 660. That's probably realistic in terms of what it could be. But anyhow, that is what's allowed. So in total, we've got 1,584 mid-rise apartments, 183 garden apartments, 427 assisted living units, and 30 cottages, a total of 2,194 residential units here as part of this development. Have to look at that and think about the density of that. That's a lot of housing in this area that's actually supposed to be commercial, office, and retail. So first of all, the existing zoning allowed in PD 242, which this area here, again, is PD 242. The existing zoning allowed for it to be developed for retail and commercial office. And it allowed, it controlled the overall intensity of the development by having a Florida area ratio of 0.4:1. What is being requested by the developer is important to compare to this, because the developer is asking for much, much more dense development. First of all, the concept plan that you saw in the prior slides depicted a Florida area ratio of 0.53:1, and we'll discuss this more specifically in a minute. But 0.53:1 is already 25 to 30% more dense than what is currently allowed in this area under PD 243. More importantly, the developer, although they presented a concept plan with an overall density of 0.53:1, they actually are asking for much closer to 1:1 for a Florida area ratio. That would actually be 2.6 times more, 2.6 times what is currently allowed in terms of Florida area ratio, and it would be double what is shown in the concept plan. So that's where we say the concept plan is misleading. What is he requested? Well, he's requested that he's tried to make it seem like this won't be that dense, because he says the floor to area ratio will be 0.5 to 1 unless there's something else stipulated. Well, almost all the land is stipulated for much denser development than that. So first of all, he says all of these areas could have 1.35 to 1. That is more than 3 times the density, the average density that was to be allowed in PD 242. And there's going to be a new street come through here. It'll be a continuation of Pinecrest. This is it. And the stipulations say along a type D thoroughfare, which Pinecrest will be, if there's parkland, I can develop at a floor to area ratio of 1.35 to 1. Well, along here are the high voltage power lines. He's going to put a sidewalk under the high voltage power lines and call that a park. And that will extend then the whole length of Pinecrest. That means that this area can be developed as 1.35 to 1, and that this area can be developed at 1.35 to 1, and this area can be developed at 1.35 to 1. As you can see, that's a huge amount of this, maybe half of the land at 1.35 to 1. In addition, the stipulations say, well, any other land along a type D boulevard can be developed at 1 to 1. Well, Parkwood along here is in fact a type D boulevard. And so this area can be developed at 1 to 1. What can be developed at 0.5 to 1? Oh, this little tiny area here, and this little small area here, and this little small area here. Because he also said that anything that's more than 500 feet north of Windhaven can be developed at 1 to 1. And then this existing piece, he also said, oh, I can have 1 to 1 for it because we're going to have another zoning case to say this is okay and carved out from the rest of what's currently PD 243. So again, he's asking for twice what he's presented in the concept plan. This actually shows that. And in this concept plan, this is tract 1. And in it, he's got the multifamily with 355 square feet at 4 stories. And he's got a hotel that shows it's 2 stories, 72,000 square feet. Small amount of retail that's 1 story, and then 2 to 4 story office buildings. All of that is calculated to have a floor to area ratio of 0.53 to 1. There it is there again, 0.53 to 1. But what's his requested stipulation? 0.95 to 1. Okay, that's area 1. In area right here, tract 2, he's requesting 0.54 to 1. This again included another 350 unit apartment building, 4 stories, 2 two-story office buildings with 100 square feet. And he said that came to 0.54 to 1, but what's he actually requesting? 1.1 to 1, twice what's in the concept plan. Area 3. Right here is tract 3, and in it, it's got, again, as we said, the 4 5-story assisted living buildings with 335 square feet, and it's got 2 3-story office buildings with 86,000 square feet. Says that that's 0.51 to 1 right here. What's he actually requesting in the stipulations? 1.18 to 1. And then over here, this is the age-restricted apartments, age 55 and above. They're at 0.98 to 1. So in total, the concept plan shows a floor to area ratio of 0.53 to 1, but actually they're requesting an average in the stipulations of 1.04 to 1, twice as dense as the pictures he's showing. That's very important. How can you approve something that is way denser than the concept plan you're presenting? And the concept plan is supposed to depict what actually is going to get developed. And this is reflected in the fact that the concept plan has a 2-story hotel and 2 to 4-story offices, but the stipulations would allow 5-story offices and a 5-story hotel. So this is why, in my view, the concept plan is missing. Here is a depiction of what is going on. And these are the proposed excerpts of the proposed stipulations. First of all, in 1, he says, oh, tracts A and B, we need to allow multifamily residence. Multifamily residence is not currently allowed. It's zoned for commercial, office, and retail. Wants to have a food truck park and a winery. This would all be in a very small area, but wants exceptions to the zoning to allow for that. In the area, yard, and bulk requirement, this is really where the density gets set. You see here maximum height. It says office 4-story, but then it says except adjacent to type D thoroughfares 5 stories. Well, almost all the buildings are adjoining a type D thoroughfare, either the future Pinecrest or existing Parkwood. So most of it could be 5-story. It says here hotel 5 stories. Again, he had requested, or in the concept plan it shows as a 2-story hotel, but asking for 5 stories. Here again, the slick trick, call it, oh, floor to area ratio 0.5, except for where provided elsewhere. As we said, almost all of it is elsewhere. Probably over 50% of it falls in, I can have 1.35 to 1, with far more dense than 0.5 to 1, and much of it, the rest of it, falls in 1 to 1, which is again twice as dense as the 0.5 to 1 that it acts like would be the general zoning for the area. Also here in 4, requesting a deviation from the retirement housing standards, and saying that it doesn't have to be set back from single-family homes as is currently required by our zoning regulations. So they'd be exempt from that and could build their 5-story building very close to existing single-family. But one of the biggest things that I would say about this really has to do with this aspect, phasing. And in this, for the multifamily to try to satisfy concerns about what we've had go on in Plano, which is we've had these kind of mixed-use developments come in, and what happens? Oh, they build the multifamily and they never build the offices that were promised. And then they just come back later and want to build more multifamily. So the stipulation says, oh, well, before a certificate of occupancy would be granted for the first 350,000 square feet or first 350 units of multifamily, which would be about 355,000 square feet, that they'd have to build a minimum of 100,000 square feet of non-residential use. That doesn't meet what we're proposing as part of our new concept plan, which is, part of the new comprehensive plan for Plano as a general requirement, which would require that it be 50% of the residential at all times, that would require 175,000 square feet, not 100,000 square feet. And then it says in phase 2, a certificate of occupancy will not be issued for the second phase in Tract B until there's been certificate of occupancy issued for a total of 300,000 square feet of non-residential uses. But one of the things I think is very important is the developer's gone around to the neighborhood and shown us these pictures and, intimated that, these offices in Tract 1 and 2 would be developed, as part of developing the apartments. But what isn't said here is, oh no, this could be Tract C. And, the buildings that are in Tract C, they could count as the non-residential. So in Tracts A and B, we might not see any commercial office building. It all might be in Tract C. And in fact, the important question is, is the assisted living allowed to be counted as commercial office? And the adjunct facilities for the assisted living all counted to be as non-residential, and so they could just build that assisted living facility and then they can build all the apartments, and we still don't have any of the other commercial development that we're looking to have. I consider this to be a real fake out. So I think those are very important points. Overall, I think what's very important is that the developer during the meetings has tried to only address pieces of the project and has changed the story multiple times. At some of the neighborhood meetings, the developer tried to only discuss Tract 1. When residents tried to ask questions about the rest of the development, he said those were other phases or being done by other developers, and he did not have the information. When pressed, he acknowledged there were more phases and things going on, but basically said he didn't really have the details. At other meetings, the developer only addressed what was in Tracts 1 and 2, stating that the other tracts weren't part of their project, and the retirement community and assisted living was a different project. At the same time, he may have shown other plans or concept plans that showed down in the far corner those 100 single-family attached townhomes, even though that's not part of the request, and they're not asking to change the current zoning, which would still allow multifamily in that area. Finally, the developer requested that, or he went on and on about how low density the development was, and how the hotel would be this boutique 2-story curated hotel. But then in the request we see, it's a 5-story hotel, and in fact, at some times he even talked about 7 stories. And at one of the meetings, I can say I confronted him about the overall floor to area ratio in what he was presenting at the time being 1-to-1. And the developer said he was surprised by that. That isn't what they were intending to build, and that they would fix that. Well, they haven't fixed it. In fact, if anything, it got more dense after that in terms of their request, because their request is actually slightly greater than 1-to-1. Important point is this whole request ignores the fact that at the southwest corner of Spring Creek and Parkwood, it's also owned by the Haggard Enterprises Acres of Sunshine, and this would easily accommodate up to 660 multifamily units in buildings up to 12 stories. That building was rezoned in 2014 over the objections of citizens. Since it's not been utilized, I would suggest that one thing that should happen as part of this request is Haggard should be asked to rescind that zoning so it goes back to just being commercial office expressway corridor, which is what it was, and that there would be no special allowance for a 4-to-1 floor to area ratio of residential development. Throughout the presentations, the developer has presented lots of pretty pictures of the linear parks showing lots of trees and vegetation under the power lines. We pointed out that Encore does not allow anything other than grass to be planted under these power lines. The developer blamed artistic license and acknowledged that that was inaccurate. The developer emphasized, as we said, that this square footage of non-residential would be built as part of building the apartments. But as we see, that could be a ruse. It could be built in track 3 as part of the assisted living project, and we would never get the non-residential at the time the apartments were built. I mentioned before that the developer's taking credit for a lot of green space and parks. Actually, there is a small 3-acre park that's actually quite small, but it was something that the developer committed to and was required to build when Avignon was built, and now is finally getting around in track 2 to actually providing that park. All the other open space that's listed as parkland here is either floodplain or is under the Encore high voltage line. As I mentioned, under the Encore high voltage line, no trees, really just a sidewalk. And along the floodplain, yes, there will be a sidewalk, but what happens when we have that in a floodplain? Well, when it rains, it's underwater, and then after that, it's covered in mud, and the city has to come out and uncover it before it is even usable again. Be nice to have, but it's not like this is some wonderful concession the developer is making. It's undevelopable land to begin with. So in 2014, the Haggard family proposed rezoning the 282-acre Haggard Farm West to allow up to 4,990 multifamily units. The residents in the area completely rejected the proposal and it was withdrawn. But if this proposal is adopted as is, there will be approval for 1,584 mid-rise multifamily units and 427 assisted living units. This proposal only covers half of Haggard Farm West. We can expect additional multifamily requests in the future. Also, the requested zoning allows much greater density than's in the concept plan, and there are no plans to build most of the commercial space. We can expect the developer to return asking to use the density for more multifamily in tracks 1 or 2. So that's my view, and I just thank you for listening.